Your contract is worthless if you don't read this clause. Is that true? Is there just one clause? Are there more we have to be careful about? I'm talking about a real estate contract. Let's ask an expert. I'll be right back. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Inside the Deal Through Michael's Eyes. It's a fresh take on real estate and business in general. My name is Michael Renick and I am your host for this podcast. This is all about doing business the right way, the legal way, the ethical way, and even more. So the podcast, the purpose is to combine both my past GM business experience along with the real estate experience. I want to go beyond the surface. I want to offer a candid look at how business should be done right, whether you're navigating the complexities of real estate or tackling broader business challenges. Education is one of our main goals here. Let me introduce you my partner in crime today. This is Mr. Michael Hanken. He's the man I call the powerhouse of legal insight, based right here in Sarasota. With a deep understanding of the legal landscape and a commitment to helping others navigate complex issues, Michael brings a wealth of knowledge and a fresh perspective to our discussions. You won't want to miss this conversation. Michael, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about you, Mike?
Well, after how many technical difficulties have we had today? The Gremlins yesterday videos with Don and today with you, they're not behaving. Maybe I'll have to get a new laptop. I can parlay this into something cool too.
I like it. They say the 6 times the charm, so we got this.
It might be. So I've got some bullet points here I want to cover, but when we talk about this, let's just talk about the real estate contract in general. The podcast title was this one clause. Do you want to start there? And then we can talk about some others maybe. What's the pitfall we have to be careful with?
Sure. So there's a couple of different pitfalls. It's really not just one. And it depends what side you're looking at. If you're the buyer and you're looking at a piece of property, you need to make sure that all of your dates line up. You need to make sure that your your default clause makes sense. Something my grandfather always taught me is you never go into something without knowing how to get out of it. And if you don't massage the default clause, there's no clean way out if for whatever reason your circumstances change and you want out of the deal after all your contingencies are up. If you massage the default clause and change a couple of really key words, you can make it so that you can get out and know what it's going to cost you to get out. You may not be able to get out without a loss and losing your deposit, but if you just leave the contract as is and something happens outside of your contingencies and you want out, you could be embroiled in a multi-year lawsuit or a seller suing you for specific performance.
Do you have that clause in front of you, Michael, that you can read it? Or I don't mean to put you on the spot. We don't rehearse these, or give a little bit more background on what the clause entails today.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can pull that up here. And so the default clause is coming up. And what it provides that if the buyer fails, basically if the buyer doesn't do what they're supposed to, including the payment of the deposit within the timeframes that are specified, a seller may elect to recover and retain the deposit for the account of the seller as agreed upon liquidated damages. And here's the key language that you'd want to remove, or the seller at seller's option may proceed pursuant to paragraph 16 in equity to enforce seller's rights under the contract. And what that means is the seller can sue your butt. If you
for performance, like in other words, make you go through with the deal?
So yes, it's specific performance sounds exactly like that. In reality, they don't force you to buy the property, but they can hold you liable for damages that result from you not buying the property. So essentially, you have to put the seller in the same place they would have been had you gone through with it.
So if it was like a 90-day closing, some of the damages could be in the longer length of property taxes, and I'm just shooting from the hip here.
Sure.
Because those would be expenses they wouldn't have occurred if it closed on time, correct?
Right. So let me give you the big situation that comes up. So buyer's under contract, does an as-is contract. For whatever reason, they miss some things in their inspection, and they find out a week before closing, outside of their inspection period, that the house has huge foundation issues. It's crumbling. The house it's not livable. A buyer would want out of the contract, right?
Absolutely.
So let's say they have this property under contract for $1 million. With all of the foundation issues, maybe the property is worth 200,000.
Mm-hmm.
So now the seller, who is expecting to get $1 million, knows about the foundation problem. Their property is now worth 200,000. If they go and they sell it to anybody else, they have to disclose this hidden problem. And they were expecting to receive $1 million. Their specific performance damages are, in this case, $800,000.
So I have a technical term for that. Ouch.
Right. Now, if we had just represented the buyer in that particular case, taken out the specific performance language, that buyer would be able to walk away and just lose his deposit. So maybe $20,000, $30,000. And the buyer would be able to make another decision and get out of there and know what it was going to take to get out of that deal.
So you really, by making the change you're talking about, you minimize any risk to the buyer.
Right. The buyer has certainty in their choices. So if a buyer wants to default, they know what it's going to cost them.
So could you use this if the buyer just wanted to change their mind at the last minute, buyer's remorse, and saying, I'm not going through with it?
Sure. Let's say another unit comes for sale and it is $100,000 less than the property that the buyer had under contract. And the buyer's got a $50,000 deposit. The buyer, it might make perfect sense for the buyer to walk away from their $50,000 deposit, buy the other unit for $100,000 less. Buyer, although they're losing 50 grand on the first contract, are still $50,000 better off, assuming the units are otherwise the same.
Sure.
And they can make a rational decision based upon certainty, something that's been agreed to.
So this is a really good case of why you need not only an experienced real estate broker, you need an experienced Florida real estate attorney.
For sure. And there are so many different little pitfalls. That is by far the main one that we always recommend when we're representing a buyer.
Are there other areas that we also want to share and they want to focus on?
Oh, God, there's so many. So about 2.5, 3 years ago, they changed the financing clause.
Oh, I remember that.
The financing clause used to have this. Essentially, it was just a time period for the buyer to be underwritten to make sure that the buyer was capable of servicing the loan. And previous to the recent change, well, not so recent, but previous to the last change, it allowed for the appraisal to be obtained really at any time prior to closing. And with the change, the appraisal has to be obtained within the financing contingency period. And if it's not, well, the buyer's on the hook for that. So the buyer might receive a commitment from a lender that says, hey, you're approved for this loan. And a buyer might think, hey, great, the bank's going to give me this amount of money. But the little small print in those approvals is it always says subject to an appraisal. And if a buyer is unaware that the appraisal portion of the contingency doesn't run up until closing, that buyer can get stuck really with a squeezed lower appraised value. So the buyer may wind up having to bring a lot more money to closing than they thought and not have any great way out.
So let me take us in the weeds for just a second. Again, these aren't rehearsed, but I have a 30-day finance contingency, and I'm on day 29. In the appraisal, it's clear isn't going to be done in the 30 days. What do I have options as a buyer at that point?
Sure. So you haven't received an appraisal that's sufficient to support the value, and you could cancel or try to enter into an amendment to the contract with the seller, which would extend the period. Now, you have to be very careful because the contract requires good faith and diligence in trying to obtain your approvals, which includes the appraisal. So what happens, I'll tell you a lot of the time, is buyers don't want to risk money if they don't have to. So a buyer, a lot of the time, will tell their bank, hey, don't order the appraisal yet until my inspections are done. And what happens is you wind up, one, both being in default because you didn't pursue all of your approvals, including the appraisal contingency, with good faith and diligence. And two, you run out of time to get your appraisal, and you're in really a world of hurt because you're in really double jeopardy, I'd say, at that point.
But that would have to be a case where the buyer delayed the appraisal. Is that correct?
Correct, right. And we see that all the time. A buyer doesn't want to spend $400 to $500 on an appraisal if the property isn't going to come out well with its inspections.
Yep, absolutely. That question that I asked you, you would have been proud. I knew the answer. I just wanted to hear it from you.
Well, good. It's good to have you keep me honest. So
no, your job is to keep me on my toes. So
keep you out of jail, Mike.
I was going to say that. I wasn't sure it was appropriate. So far, you've been successful. In the few minutes this podcast has been going on, no one's knocking at my door. So I must be in pretty good shape.
Give it time.
So real estate is, it's one of the most expensive purchases or transactions that buyers and sellers that are into it. You want to make sure it's right. Having a team, you need a good inspector. We've talked about that. You need a good mortgage person if it's finance. You need a good real estate broker as your basis. You need a good real estate attorney. Putting it all together increases the likelihood of success. And success, in my mind, is you walk away after the closing and the seller and the buyer are both happy. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And people, I don't think, always realize how many different disciplines go into a purchase. It's almost equivalent to building a house. You need, when you build, a roofer, a plumber, an electrician, an HVAC guy, somebody to do your site work, somebody to do your foundation. You have all these different trades, all these different specialties coming together to come up with an end product. And too many people think, hey, people buy homes every day. I can do this without all of my professionals around me. But you really do need a good broker, a good attorney, a good mortgage broker, a good inspector, and all of these people coming together to work well in harmony with one another is what makes for a real successful, smooth, easy closing for all parties involved.
And the way to get a team like that, if you're buying into an area that you don't know people very well, your real estate broker is your foundation. He or she can bring these in, make recommendations. It's the buyer or seller's choice who they hire, but an experienced real estate broker can provide all the above.
Absolutely.
We're talking about financing, so I'm going to deviate for a second. It has nothing to do with real estate, but it is financing. So I was I did buy another SUV, and it's an expensive one, but I fully qualify and I have the assets to back it up and I have no debt. So I go into one of the banks I deal with and say, I'd like to talk about a 72 or an 84-month loan, just for kicks and giggles to see what it would be. And I was told I can get you information on one, but I can't do both. And I thought, well, that's kind of crazy. Why can't I have the information on both? So I left pretty frustrated. I went to another bank. And I sat at the desk of one of the bankers, very nice young man, very helpful, wanted to do a good job, and says, I can't answer your question. We only do that online. You have to go out to the website. So even though I'm sitting there in the bank, in the office, they can't facilitate an automobile loan. So I went to a third bank. And I really love this young lady. She looked at me and says, you're not going to like our rates. They're terrible. So at the end of the day, I did what I usually do, and I went to the dealer and I financed whoever the dealer told me to go through with the credit score and stuff. But it's just, you talk about business done right. You talk about financing. It brings up the story. Even when you're qualified and you want to make a purchase like that, it's very difficult today. This whole world is turned upside down.
And nothing seems to be easy anymore. The old days, you'd call your banker, you'd have the money in your account, and 3 days later, you might sign the paperwork.
My mortgage guy that I like to deal with a lot, and he co-hosts many of these podcasts with him. I called him and I said, I'm trying to borrow $100,000 to buy this SUV. Can you do a 3-year mortgage for me so I can buy the truck instead of a house? So anyway, that's another story. Michael, I want to thank you for being a part of this. The message is very clear. Things need to be done the right way. Buyers and sellers need to be protected. You need an extended team that's got the right folks involved. Anything else, Michael?
Nope, I couldn't have said it better myself.
I appreciate that. Thank you for participating in this. And until next time, we'll be back with more information. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.